Good afternoon, Mr. Barber. All right. So now we're going to get ready to start. So, welcome to the Black Archives Safer at Home virtual series. My segment today is called Legacies, Profiles in Greatness. My name is Louis Berthen. I am the Assistant Archivist. So today's segment is dedicated to Richard E.S. Toomey, an attorney, an orator, and a scholar. So let's just get into it. All right. So first of all, Richard Toomey was not a Miami native. He was born in Baltimore, Maryland in 1861. So if there's any alarm bells going off in your head because of that, it's because 1861 is the year that the Civil War started. Now, interestingly, Maryland did not actually abolish slavery until 1864, a year after the Emancipation Proclamation. So while I don't have any definitive proof of Toomey's status when he was born, whether he was born a slave or he was born free, I think it's interesting to note that Maryland did not abolish slavery until 1864. So this is just to say that the ideas of liberty, freedom, and representation are things that he takes very seriously, and it might stem from this. You're going to see that those are very common threads in a lot of his work, so I hope you'll see it too. So when Toomey was of age, he attended two HBCUs. He attended Lincoln University, and he obtained his law degree from Howard University. However, before graduating and obtaining his law degree, Toomey actually served his country. He fought in the Spanish-American War. He actually became the first black soldier to be commissioned as an officer during the conflict. His rank was the first lieutenant of the 8th Regiment of the United States Volunteer Infantry. So he was such a valiant fighter that they even awarded him a tribute from the Treasury, which is something I didn't actually know the Treasury did. On July 12, 1898, he was awarded a sword for his valor and bravery during the Spanish-American War. So let me just read you a portion of his acceptance. Tribute from the Treasury. Lieutenant R.E. Toomey presented with a handsome sword by his official associates. So let me just read you his acceptance. I accept this sword not as a hero, or one who has done anything to distinguish him from the great mass of American patriots, but as a humble citizen who loves his country, sees his duty, and strives to perform that duty as best he may. I shall endeavor by consistent soldierly conduct to vindicate more emphatically than hitherto my right, the confidence, and esteem of the excellent men and women who compose the present force of the NC&C Division of the Register's Office, pledging you all that this good sword will ever be used in honorable service to our beloved country, and wishing for the donor's health, happiness, and prosperity. I remain for God and our country, very truly, Richard E. Toomey. So I think you can see there's a degree of humbleness to the man, and he is very eloquent, and you will continue to see that while I read more of his works. So Toomey's accolades don't stop there. Even though receiving a sword for your valor is very impressive, he was actually a gifted writer and poet. His poems focused on blackness in America and the idea of pride in one's color. His most famous published work, Thoughts for True Americans, was even recognized by another famous poet, Paul Laurence Dunbar. Dunbar and Toomey were actually friends, and Dunbar had dubbed Toomey the soldier poet. Richard Toomey and Paul Laurence Dunbar also share the distinct honor of being the only two colored poets to have been invited to read their works in front of the Library of Congress as of 1913. So I'd actually love to read you one of his poems. This poem is called Pyramid Builders, and it is a tribute to the worth of Professor Booker T. Washington. I'm going to try to do my best. Amid Sahara's desert sands, the wonder of the ages stands, nor yields these many years to storms, of wind or storms whatever their form. These pyramids saw ages pass, heard their matin and their death mass, viewed many a more ambitious pile float by inert upon time's Nile. Massive and strong they hold their place, looking the ages in the face, unmoved, for their foundation deep with nature long hath lain in sleep, and so with all things that ever last, which mid time's change would stand fast. Deep foundation must be made, as in these mammoth structures laid, be in monument stately, tall, capital or ancestral hall, race or nation or fame of man, each must follow this proven plan. If this the plan on which they're reared, though oft assailed, their frontage seared, the fiercest rage of colder heat must break and cower at their feet. Each builder the foundation lays, before the mansion he doth raise. How inane then to chide the man who shows a race this simple plan. Build ye the house with every art, enhance it and new charms impart, yet all must yield in measure due to foundations laid deep and true. Thus built the house will ever stand for present need and long demand. Steadfast for ages it will rise, a tribute into the builder's wise. Build where the foreman finds the rock, then neither storm nor sudden shock can rend thy work. It ever will stand to lift thy kind and bless the land. O builder, let thy work proceed, supplying well the people's need. Unmoved though hot winds sow and wind, pyramid-like stands thy design. Richard E.S. Toomey. So I hope that was as much fun for you to listen to as it was for me to read. But you can see that he has this connection, this idea of, he has a very strong sense of history and a very strong sense of pride in his ancestry. So it's not surprising that he was an advocate for black rights, and he consistently defended black folks from unfounded racist attacks. So there was actually one episode that played out over a couple editorials. So there was a white general named Baldwin who made some racist claims about black soldiers and their worth, and Toomey took it upon himself to reply and refute this in a very eloquent way. So I'm going to read you this letter that he wrote. Unfortunately, I do not have the original letter that General Baldwin had written. I think, though, that you're going to be able to get the gravity of the situation through Toomey's words. Another note that I'd like to point out is that this letter is full of historical references that are just fantastic. So keep your ears open, see if you can catch any of them. I'll go over some of them at the end that I really appreciated. Reminders to General Baldwin. The Negro's valor a matter of history since Battle of Bunker Hill. I simply desire to call General Baldwin's attention to a few facts of American history. Through the columns of your paper and ask in the light these facts whether the life of the Negro soldier ought to be regarded as being of no more worth than that of a yellow cur. The blood of Crispus Attucks consecrated American soil to liberty. Peter Salem's well-aimed shot turned the tide of battle at Bunker Hill. Negro soldiers tramped the blood-stained snow of Valley Forge with Washington. Negro sailors fought with Commodore Perry on Lake Erie. Negro soldiers piled up the cotton breastworks and fought under Jackson at New Orleans. They were with Taylor in the Mexican War. When the nation was convulsed in the throes of internecine strife, he fought for the Union, yet defended his master's hearthstone. He has scoured the plains and saved his white comrade in arms from annihilation. During the Spanish-American War, the black sailor Tunnel fell when Bagley died. The Negro helped Dewey to victory at Manila Bay. He stepped over the 71st Regiment and marched on to victory up San Juan Hill. He is ready today, as he has ever been, to lay down his life for his country, believing that time and the true appreciation of American ideals will bring to him all the amenities that American liberty implies. I but suggest these facts to show the general how ill-timed, how unwarranted are his strictures upon the aspersions against the Negro soldier. Most of the honest warriors who have come into contact with the Negro soldiers of the American Army will testify as to their patriotism, courage, and integrity. Also, their ambition to reach the highest type of American citizenship. Richard E. Toomey, 1st Lieutenant of the 8th United States Volunteer Infantry. So, I don't know if you guys caught a couple of them, but I'll go over some. So, Crispus Attucks is widely regarded as one of the first men to die, in the Boston Massacre. That would subsequently make him the first American to die during the American Revolution. I particularly appreciated the reference to Commodore Perry on Lake Erie. That's a reference to the War of 1812, where Commodore Perry beat back 2 British warships. The Mexican War that got us Texas and California. And when the nation war convulsed in the throes of internecine strife, he fought for the Union, yet defended his master's hearthstone. This is a reference to how black soldiers fought on both sides of the Civil War. So, we'll continue. So this all happened before Toomey even arrived in Miami. So when he arrived in 1912, it was a very significant event for black professionals. He opened his law practice in 1913, and this law practice was actually the first law practice to be opened by an African-American man in Miami. According to the 1940 directory, it was located at 608 Northwest 2nd Avenue, which was also known as Avenue G. Again, I referenced this last week, and I will continue to reference it. Avenue G, 2nd Avenue, was a very important street in Overtown's history. But I'd also like to remind you that he came to Miami at a time when it was segregated. The discrimination of blacks influenced his work and almost all aspects of his life. So as an attorney, he was actually not allowed to present his cases in court because only white male attorneys could do so. However, his legal writing skill were unparalleled, and many white lawyers had even come to seek his legal expertise and analytical skills on their cases. So, Toomey, not only being an outstanding legal scholar, he was an outspoken advocate for the community. He, along with other community figures like Kelsey Farr and D.A. Dorsey, regularly worked for Colortown and its people. For example, the Liberty Square project, the second of its kind multi-million-dollar project in Liberty City, he was part of the first advisory committee to assist with the housing manager. So, I'll read you the quote. The first advisory committee put together to assist the housing manager, Captain James E. Scott, included Father John E. Comer, Kelsey Farr, president of the Negro Civic League, Dr. W.B. Sawyer, Professor Charles Thompson, and attorney R.E.S. Toomey. But he did more than just community organizing. He also organized the Home Service Defense. So the Home Service Defense was essentially a group of 40 colored men that Toomey himself specially trained to defend Colortown in case World War I ever came to American shores. So I know that when we think of wars, we usually tend to think of the Civil War as the only war fought on American soil, other than the American Revolution. However, this was a time for concern. In World War I, many German submarines were caught off the coast of Florida, so there was real concern for Floridians about German invasion. So this group was to defend Colortown. He also supported the war effort by becoming a 4-Minute Man. So the 4-Minute Man program was essentially a government program that was used to build support for the war in the United States. You have to understand that World War I was a deeply unpopular war, and Woodrow Wilson, who was the president, actually won the presidency on an isolationist stance. He campaigned on the idea of not getting involved in the war in Europe. We did. So the 4-Minute Men was a way to change the public opinion, gather support, volunteers, and money. So they would go and present in public places. For example, D.A. Dorsey and Richard Toomey presented at the Lyric Theater. They presented before plays or movies, and they would basically try to garner support and get funds and volunteers. So he helped fund the war effort, like I said. Last week I told you about Florence Gaskins and her war-saving stamp drive. The other fundraising effort I told you about was the Liberty Loan Drive. This effort was very successful thanks to Richard Toomey and other figures like him in Colortown. Unsurprisingly, Richard Toomey was also involved in politics. So, maybe not surprisingly, he was a Republican at the time. So it must sound strange nowadays, but in 1920, the Republican Party was still considered the party of Lincoln. And conversely, Democrats were known as Dixiecrats. Their whole platform was defending the Southern way of life. So Toomey actually spoke to the colored folk in Overtown on behalf of the Republicans. So let me read you some of that. Stick together and vote GOP. Message delivered by Negro speakers to Colortown audience. Stick together and vote the Republican ticket was the message delivered by a number of Negro speakers to gathering assembled at Oddfellows Hall, Colortown, last night. Richard E.S. Toomey was the principal orator of the evening, and he found a sympathetic audience. He welcomed the women as voters and said that privilege had been brought about by a few Republican members of the Tennessee legislature. He then lauded the Republican Party as the champions of the underdog and friend of humanity. And though Abraham Lincoln, who had not entered the White House with the intention of freeing the slaves, had paved the way for a higher civilization, it had come to pass, the speaker said, that the colored man didn't care how or when it was done. The fact remained that it had been done by the Republican Party, and it was right for the Negro to give the party his vote. So, other than his screaming support for the Republican Party, I would like to pay attention to another line in there. He welcomed the women as voters and said the privilege had been brought on by a few Republican members. So this article was released in 1920. The women's suffrage movement had just achieved the right to vote, and the 19th Amendment passed in 1919. So this would have actually been the first presidential election that women were allowed to vote in. However, even though Toomey was involved in politics and asking people to go out and vote, Miami, even though we like to think of it as a multicultural city and a melting pot of many different people, it's still part of Florida, which is a southern state. We had our own set of Jim Crow laws. Specifically in Miami, I know that we had a poll tax instituted. Other states had passed poll taxes and literacy exams. All of this was done to suppress the black vote. However, anyway, he still believed it was very important for black Americans to exercise their full rights, and we see this constantly through all his work. So, unfortunately, Richard Toomey passed in 1948 at the age of 87. His gravestone in the Miami City Cemetery is specially marked as the first black lawyer in Miami, and he has a special military marker that has his rank and regiment on it. So, he blazed a trail through his multiple works that would serve as an example to many other people going through. Ellie Thomas, G. Graves, and his stepson Calvin Mapp. These men were incredible lawyers in their own right, and some of them eventually took the next step and became judges. And it's hard to see how they would have been able to accomplish that if it weren't for the trail that Richard Toomey blazed. So I actually have a picture that I would like to share with you guys of Richard Toomey. This is thanks to Links Incorporated. This is their Links and Legacies book. So this is Richard Toomey right here. He looks a little bit like Ben Carson, I think. But that pretty much covers the story of Richard Toomey and his works. I'll take any questions if there are any. Thank you all for joining, by the way. I'll just wait a little bit longer for maybe a question. If not, we'll do the sign out. Thank you. I appreciate that you guys learned something new. I think he's an incredible figure. I mean, when I was learning about him, I was thoroughly impressed. I mean, just the fact alone that many people... do I know what kind of cases he handled? Actually, I wasn't able to find any of the cases he personally did. I know a lot of the community organizing that he did. He actually started a fraternity in Overtown that I have somewhere around here, but it was for support in the Overtown community. But unfortunately, I do not know what kind of cases he worked. And also to be a commissioned officer, the first commissioned officer. And you know what's funny? So I actually have some of his documents here. I'm going to see if any of them state where he fought. I had actually not come across that information when he fought in the Spanish-American War. But since he makes references to both the fight in Manila Bay or the fight in Cuba and San Juan Hill, it would have to be one of those two theaters. Also, is incredible that, I mean, it's also the fact that he was a poet was just amazing to me, and I really enjoyed a lot of his poetry. He's a very eloquent man, and reading his works, it made my job easier because he's quite the writer, really. is actually in Washington, there was something called the Second Baptist Lyceum, which was a literary and musical feast that he was personally invited to, and he read his poetry there. So that's also really cool. But how many African Americans fought in the Spanish-American War? That's an interesting question. I actually don't know the answer to that, but we'll see if we can figure that out. So apparently, according to a website called 13.org, black soldiers were needed to fight for the country. Out of America's 25,000 man standing army, 2,500 were experienced black veterans. So about what, 10% of the army? It's pretty good. And he used that experience as an officer to obviously start the home service defense. And last week I was talking about Florence Gaskins. She and Richard Toomey had again organized a parade and Christmas dinner for the returning veterans of World War I. So he was integral to a lot of the good works that happened in Overtown. So thank you guys all for tuning in. I really appreciate you joining in for another week of Legacies, Profiles in Greatness. Tomorrow we have our virtual field trips with the director, Timothy Barber, at 12. And on Saturday at 11 a.m. we have Story Time in Color with Camila Pritchett. So thank you guys for joining me. It was a pleasure. I will see you next week with another Legacies, Profiles in Greatness. Bye-bye.